Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf tzadichet. We're going to continue with laws of bitul, and I will just mention, this is a little bit important to understand for tomorrow's daf, I should have really mentioned this yesterday, that when we got to this idea that Rava said, that sometimes it's tam, sometimes it's kfela, sometimes it's shishim, this whole idea of shishim really developed later, and it seems to have developed, which we're going to see today, at the end of the Tanaitic time period, right in that transition. And originally the idea was really taste, and that's what we saw with the batzal and the kaflot, right? The leeks and the onion, and use something and really test it. And only over time, and this happens a lot in halacha, that it develops to the sense where something then becomes sort of standardized. It's very hard to deal with a halachic system where things aren't standardized. And the shishim is another one of those examples where things kind of turn into a standard. Today we're going to see all that kind of fluid territory where it wasn't exactly determined what it was, or possibly. It's going to sort of depend on how we understand certain sugyot today. In any case, let's go back to the egg. We had the egg is b'shishim, but the egg doesn't count as part of the count of shishim. And then we said that Amarle Rav Idi bar Avin L'Abaye, right? He said, wait, are you saying it says it gives flavor, but we said eggs don't give any taste? To which Abaye answered, we're talking about a beitzat efrach, which we said because it has a chick inside, then it's like a nevela, because what you did is you cooked up the egg with the chick. The chick is now non-kosher meat because it was cooked, right? It was killed not by shchita, and therefore, and that is like meat, right? The meat of the chicken, of the chick, and that has flavor. We're not talking about the egg, we're really talking about the chick. But tme'ah not. Now Tosfot there, by the way, says, and he relates to the issue of the blood in the egg, right? Because remember, the fertilized, right, eggs that are fertilized are not kosher because they had a chick in them, and the blood is an indicator of the chick that was in it. So, and then he goes even so far as to say that the whole egg is going to be forbidden if there's a little bit of blood in it. Okay, we actually hold that you could take the blood out if you could take it out completely. It's okay, but Tosfot says from here he thinks that it permeates the whole egg. Okay, that's a side point about blood and eggs. I'm now going to get back to our topic. So the Gemara brings a difficulty on Abaye's answer, saying this time about an egg that's in a froch, and the regular egg doesn't really give taste, so an egg from a non-kosher bird would not be a problem, right? It would be basically batel barov. You wouldn't need to worry about the taste. Eitive, but wait, this contradicts the following source. It's from the Tosefta. Beitzim tehorot sheshlakan and beitzim tmeot. If you have kosher eggs that you cooked with non-kosher eggs, this seems to be eggs from a non-kosher bird. Im yesh behem benotein tam kulam asurot. If the non-kosher eggs give flavor, then they're forbidden, right? This sounds like, okay, it didn't say shishim, but it's the same concept basically. If it gives taste, and we said eggs don't give any flavor. So hachanami, right? And then that contradicts. So they say, no, hachanami bebeitzat efrach. No, we're going to answer this in the same way. That the non-kosher bird here means a bird, right? It could be even from a kosher bird, but it means a bird with a chick in it, which is again forbidden to eat. So why do they call it tme'ah, which sounds like an egg from a non-kosher bird? No, because tme'ah is a catch-all. It's something that's not kosher. Well, the chick isn't, right? The chick even from a kosher bird is not, right? An egg with a chick is not kosher even from a kosher bird. So they called it not kosher because it's just not able to be eaten. But wait. So now we're going to explain, in order to resolve this difficulty, where Abaye said it's the beitzat efrach and the other one doesn't give taste. So we're now going to say that Tosefta is talking about not really a non-kosher, a bird from a non-kosher egg, an egg from a non-kosher bird, but it's talking about an egg, a fertilized egg with a chick in it. But it's very hard to read the Tosefta that way, because Hamid Katane Seifa, the end of that Tosefta says, Beitzim sheshlakam v'nimtza efrach be'echad mehem. If you have eggs that you cooked and one of them happens to have a chick in it, im yesh behem benotein tam kulam asura. Right, you realize later that one of them had a chick. So if the one that had the chick gave flavor, then the rest are forbidden. Michlal, from here you can infer the reisha lebehe efrach haskina. Well, if the second case in the Tosefta is talking about when there's a chick in it, and the first case just said a non-kosher egg, must be that the non-kosher egg must be, we have to differentiate the two cases, otherwise why would the Tosefta repeat the same thing? To which they answered, no. You could read it all as the same thing. It's all talking about a beitzat efrach, perushe kamefaresh. The second line is coming to explain the first line. Beitzim tehorot sheshlakan beitzim tmeot. If you cook kosher eggs with non-kosher eggs. Im yesh ben benote tam kulam asurot. Right? If they give taste, they're all forbidden. Keitzad, when would you have a case of non-kosher eggs that would create this problem? Kegon sheshlakan v'nimtzah efrach be'echad mehem. And as you transition from one sentence to the other, that the second is basically explaining the first. The only time that's going to be a problem is if they're an efrach. And then you've resolved it. And in fact, they're going to further prove this. They're going to say, this is a much better reading than thinking otherwise, although the proof is going to be rejected. But right now, let's try to prove it. Hachinami mistabra, this is a better reading. If you think the first case doesn't have an efrach, now if the egg comes from a non-kosher bird, and it's going to forbid your mixture, even though we say it doesn't really have too much taste, but it is going to forbid it, right, if it gives flavor, then all the more so, if it has an efrach, of course the efrach is going to forbid it, because that's a nevela, and that has its meat, it has different taste. Of course it's going to forbid a mixture. So the fact that there's two cases, if the first case is a non-kosher, there would be no reason to say the efrach. It's obvious that it's going to be forbidden as well. So therefore, it makes more sense to read it as all one case, and it's all talking about the efrach. To which the Gemara says, listen, maybe you're right, that the Tosefta is talking about an efrach, but imishum halo iria. But if you're going to try to prove it from what you just said about the fact that there's two cases, all the more so proves it's really one case, I can reject that, because Tana Seifa L'Galuye Reisha. We've seen this many times. You could explain the second part as coming to explain what the first part's talking about. If you only had one case and it just said Of Tameh, what would you have thought? A Beitzah Tmeah. You would have thought that the Beitzah is from an animal, from a bird that's not kosher. Right? Shelo Tomar. If you just have one case and it was really talking about the Efrach, that's what we were trying to say, and the two maybe means it's actually not, right? Well, two means it wouldn't make sense to say first and then second, and the first is not kosher, the second is efrach, because the second would be obvious. But then what's the alternative? If you wanted to just say non-kosher, so now, if you had just one, what would be the problem? If you had one and it really meant efrach, that wouldn't be clear, because you might, shalotamar, don't say reisha di'ipe efrach, avalepe efrach sharia. What would you have thought? You might have thought that the first part, if we only have one case, you would have said that the reisha is when there's a chick, avalepe efrach sharia. But if there's no efrach and it's just a non-kosher, an egg from a non-kosher bird, you want to say it's permitted, right? That's what you would think. One case would be confusing, because you could either read it as the one case is a non-kosher bird, or you could read it as that one case is only an efrach, and a non-kosher bird is actually fine. Therefore, you could read it like this. Tana seifa de'ipe efrach michlal dereisha deleipe efrach v'afilu hacha asira. Maybe they wanted to give you two cases specifically. In other words, well, it's true that if you had the non-kosher bird and you started with that, it would be obvious also the efrach. But not necessarily, because you could say maybe the one case is just the efrach and not the non-kosher bird. And therefore, they give you two cases to say there's two distinct cases here, and both of them are going to be forbidden. Okay? That's what we're trying to say. So you can't necessarily say it's the best way to read the Tosefta is that way, because this is another good alternative, but it doesn't mean that's not a possible answer. Okay, moving on to another case. Ha'u kezeta tarba. We had a kezayit of chelev, the forbidden fat. Denafal b'dikula de bisra. It fell into, now there's a big debate what this means, either a pot of meat or a basket of hot meat, where it's not really on the fire. Okay, it's just a basket of hot meat. Okay, this sounds like, okay, what's the difference? Well, let's just read the case and then I'll tell you what a difference could be. Savar Rav Asi l'sha'ure b'mai debala dikula. Rav Asi said, listen, I'm going to assess this based on the amount of meat, not that's in the pot right now, but the amount of meat we started with, that some of it already got absorbed in the pot. So if you have, let's say, 58 times the amount, and then 2 times the amount actually got absorbed in the pot, we'll have 60 against the chelev. Amre le Rabbanan le Rav Ashi. Atu dehetera bala, disura lo bala, but wait. The sides of this pot or basket, whichever it might be, what you think it only absorbed meat, it also absorbed some fat. So once you're going to up to 60 the fat, but the meat, but you're going to have to up more than one, right? More than the amount of well, let's say it was let's say 55, and right. In other words, now we have a kazayit of chaylev now, but maybe it was more than a kazayit when it dropped in. So once you up that, you have to up that, and then it's a zero-sum game. So basically, he thinks that you just figure it out by the amount that's in the pot currently. Okay? Now, what's the difference if it's a pot or it's a basket? If it's a pot, then we're going to assume the fat falls in, it gets equally distributed with all the meat that's in the pot. Let's say you have a bunch of pieces of meat, so the fat's going to get absorbed equally everywhere. And that's what we're talking about. That seems very obvious. But if it falls onto a basket with a bunch of slices of meat, the fat's actually going to be absorbed into the first piece of meat it sits on. And then that piece of meat is mixed in with other pieces of meat. Okay? Now, this is a law that later we're going to see is called chaticha na'aseit nevela. That piece of meat where the fat came into, normally we would say that whole piece of meat becomes a forbidden item, and now you need 60 against the whole piece of meat. Okay, that's called chaticha na'aseit nevela. The whole piece becomes forbidden. And then that's not what's going on here. So how do you explain it then? So either that's proof that it's not a basket and that it's really a pod, or alternatively, Tosfot in a few more dapim when we get to this chaticha na'aseit nevela, Tosfot suggests that maybe chaticha na'aseit nevela is a law specifically only for, it's interesting, only for basar b'chalav, and not in other, only meat and milk, and not other things like chaylev. And that's what you see here, that because it's clear they're doing all the meat in the pot against the chaylev, against the fat, and not that whole piece of meat against all the other pieces of meat. So he claims that this could be a proof that chaticha na'aseit nevela is not relevant for all other isurim. Okay, so that's a suggestion Tosfot brings up, and it's right. Whether how you translate a word can majorly affect halacha. Okay, in any case, we're going back to our daf, right? Sticking with the pshat. How palga dezeta? Now we have a case where there's a half a zayit, and now we're going to say so a half a zayit of ditarba, of forbidden fat, denafal b'dikula debis, right? Again, fell into a pot or a basket of meat. Savar mar Rav Ashi l'shu'ur b'tlatim palge dezeta. Okay, don't be confused here. It's a half a kazayit against 30 half kazayites, which means really 15 kazayites, which means he said, listen, half a kazayit is not actually forbidden, right? By Torah, it says kazayit that's going to be forbidden. So because it's only forbidden by rabbinic law, this is what you call chatzi shir. It's half a shir, half an amount. It's not a full amount. So because it's forbidden by rabbinic law, although we're going to see in a minute, there's a machloket. Some people say chatzi shir is also forbidden by Torah law. You just don't get punished. It's a very famous machloket. But let's just put it down to rabbinic right now. So the shir of bittul, of nullification, is actually lower. So he wanted to say, let's do half the amount. Instead of 60, you need 30. That's why he says 30 half zaytim against 1 half zayit. Amar le'avuhas, his father said to him, Rav Ashi said to Mar bar Rav Ashi, Lava mina l'chalot tisalzel b'shirei d'Rabbanan. He says, wait a minute. First of all, don't be flippant about the rabbinic requisite amounts. If the rabbi said this is forbidden, then this is forbidden, then you need shishim against it. And furthermore, you're forgetting that there's an opinion. Ha'amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Yochanan debates Rish Lakish on this topic, Chatzi shiur asur min Torah. It's forbidden by Torah law. You just don't get punished, but it's completely forbidden on a Torah level, which means, of course, you need 60 against it. So Rav Ashi was against this idea of doing less than 60 for less than a shiur of prohibition. Now, we're going to get back to this possibly later. Depends on how we understand an upcoming sugya. Right now, we're going to go into another sugya. Amar Rav Shem bar Abba, Amar Rav Idi bar Gershom. We're going to have a long who said in the name of who, but we start with Rav Shem bar Abba. Remember that. Amar Rav Idi bar Gershom, Amar Levi bar Parta, Amar Rabbi Nachum, Amar Rabbi Biryam, Mishum Zaken, Echav Rabbi Yaakov Shmei. So we start with Rav Shem bar Abba. We end with this Rabbi Yaakov. Debei Nasiya Amre. Now he says, in the house of the Nasiya, another person quoting another, Beitza b'shishim asura, b'shishim v'achat muteret. An egg is not nullified in 60. Okay, surprisingly. But in 61. Now we're being more stringent about eggs. When we talked about before, we should be less stringent, but okay, we'll get to this soon. But 1 egg in 60 is no good. You need 1 egg in 61, which means you need altogether 62 eggs, 1 kosher, 61 times, 1 not kosher, 61 times kosher. Now, I'm going to try to figure this out. I'm Rabbi Zera le Rav Shem bar Abba. So Rabbi Zera says, I have a problem with what you said. It's going to be a little tricky till we figure out. You seem to be providing a very clear boundary, and what we're going to see is that some other rabbis weren't really so sure about this. There were two gedolim of the generation that weren't clear about this, like you seem to be so confident. Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi and Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani. Okay, we have these two rabbis. One is Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, one is Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, and they said, Travayu mishmei Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Amri. They both said in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Beitzah b'shishim asura, b'shishim ve'achat muteret. Okay, a beitzah in 60 is forbidden, in 61 is muteret. Okay, this sounds exactly the same, so not clear yet what the problem is. But they asked the following question: b'shishim ve'achat b'hadi dida, o dilma levar minei. Do they mean 61 including that one? Or maybe they meant in addition to that one. Okay, when they said 61, did they mean 61 including the forbidden one, which means 60 against 1, like regular shishim? Or did they mean 61 plus another one, meaning altogether you need 62 in order for Bitul to work? So that's the question. And lo pashit, lo pshat, they didn't explain it. They didn't have an answer. So now it's a little bit strange, because if they didn't have an answer, who are you to come along and say, oh, I know. Okay? Now, why? Okay, so then what happens? So he doesn't answer. Now we get Rabbi Chelbo, who was definitive about this. I'm Rabbi Chelbo Amar Rafuna, Beitzah b'shishim v'hi asura. B'shishim v'echat v'hi muteret. If you have a Beitzah b'shishim v'hi, that means 60 and the non-kosher egg, 60 kosher, 1 non-kosher, it's forbidden. Shishim v'echat v'hi, 61, and then the egg is muteret, and he was very clear about it. So in the end, we have an explanation that we are right now. Why would this be different? So the Rambam explains a very obvious answer, which is eggs come in different sizes, right? You go to the store, there's small, medium, large, extra large. Okay, they come in different sizes. So if you do 60 against the egg, it might be that the eggs are different sizes. So you have to go with 61, and then that will ensure the teeny discrepancy in the size between the different eggs will cover your bases. Okay, and that's a reason to make it 61. Okay, now I have another situation. And this is the case where we have a lot of different interpretations. Somebody came before Rabban Gamliel bar Rebbe. We're going to see from the end of the story that there was 45 against the prohibited item. So now, Amar Le, so Rebbe, right, the son of Rabban Gamliel, says, my father wouldn't permit 47, so now you're going to come to me with a question about 45. Okay, and likewise, we're going to have the same story with another son of Rabban Gamliel. This is Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rebbe. I think I said the opposite. So he said, my father, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, didn't permit, and I'm going to permit. And now we have the same story with Rabbi Shimon, the brother of Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rebbe, another son. In this case, the guy brought him something with 43 times the amount. And he said, my father wouldn't permit 45, he's going to permit 43. So Rashi goes with two different interpretations, and I'm going to bring a third. Rashi says, okay, the first interpretation is, okay, what happened to 60? Why does he say 47? My father wouldn't permit. It sounds like my father permitted 48. Or when he says 45, it sounds like my father permitted 46 or maybe 50. Okay, what happened to 60? So either we could go with not Rashi, but we could say maybe 60 wasn't so clear-cut at that point, and maybe he did somewhere. It's a little bit up in the air, exactly where, but something a little higher than 47 or 45. That's one way to look at it. Rashi suggests that perhaps it's talking about a chatzi zayid of Isur. Maybe there was less than a shear of Isur in it, like we talked about before, that Mar Bar Bashi wanted to say, oh, you only need 30 against it. And maybe what he's saying is, well, he wouldn't allow 47, but maybe he would allow a little bit more than that, and you could be a little more lenient because it's only rabbinic. That's one possibility. Or he was just using 47 as since this was 45, he said even more than that. But of course he meant not till 60. And that's a second interpretation in Rashi. Okay, so there's all different ways to read the story, and obviously then come to different conclusions. If you say it's Chatzi Shir, then it does seem like there is some maneuverability in a Chatzi Shir not to go up to 60. If you say it was before the time where 60 was set, okay, well then it doesn't really matter, because the halacha, they said 60, and then there's nothing to learn from here. Okay, anyway, it's interesting. Now we have a third case. Someone came before Rabbi Chia. Amar le, klum yesh shloshim. He said, is there such a shir as shloshim? Like, no way can I permit, you have 30, if you have 30 against the Isser, definitely no one says that. So now it sounds like Tama Deleka Shloshim, Ika Shloshim Sharina. Now, he says, you don't even have 30. And the truth is, I didn't translate right. You say, you don't even have 30. So it sounds like if you had 30, it would have worked. So they say, no, I'm Rabbi Chanina Guzma. He was just exaggerating. He was saying, you don't even have 30. Forget about the fact that you need 60. But don't think that means you don't have 30, and that means if you add 30, I would have permitted it. Okay. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Mishum bar Kapala. Now we're going to see, and this is why I said we're going to see how early it is. This is the generation of the turnover from Tanaim Tamoraim, Bar Kapara, and Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Shua ben Levi says in the name of Bar Kapara, Kol Isurim Shabbatorah b'Shishim. Okay, Bar Kapara was at the change of the generation, and he's quoted as saying, all prohibitions in the Torah are Shishim. Amar lefanav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, Rebbe, Ata American, you're really saying this? But Hachi Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Okay, Rabbi Chia bar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, in the name of Bar Kapara. But I have a tradition that Rav Asi said in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Mishum bar Kapara, Kol Yisurin Shabbatorah b'Mea. It's actually 100 times. Ushneim lo lamdua ela mizroa b'shela. Okay, now we get this new shiur of Mea, and now we're going to have to figure out where we get it from, but you have to be patient, because we're going to build a few things first. So the first thing is to know what the zroa b'shela is. Dichtiv. Okay, this is in the Nazir ceremony. The Nazir has to bring a korban, a ram, as a shlamim, as a peace offering. And it says there, V'lakacha kohen et hazroa b'shela. He takes the foreleg, which is cooked. The word b'shela. We're going to have two interpretations of the word b'shela. V'tanya b'shela, turning out amabet, ein b'shela ela shlema. B'shela actually appears, Rashi says, in some other language, but we don't know what language. Okay, it says, lo nitparesh be'ezel lashon, I don't know what language. But according to the first opinion here, which is, the Tanna Kama, ein b'shela ela shlema. B'shela means whole. Okay, we're going to see what this means soon. Right now it means whole, so Rashi says, I don't know what language you're talking about. Tosfot says, maybe b'shela, they read as b'shela, in itself, meaning in its complete form. Okay, whole. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, "Ein b'shela ela shenit bashla im ha'ayil." What does b'shela mean? It means it was cooked with the ayil itself, with the ram. Now, why is this important? Well, if it's cooked with the ram, then you're basically cooking a part of the animal that's supposed to go only to the Kohen. Let's compare that to Truma, let's say, which can only be by a Kohen. Any food only by a Kohen can't be eaten by anybody else. And then it gets cooked with meat that is eaten by a regular person. And now, the regular person, right, the Nazir, can eat his own korban shlamim. Now it has the meat, which is for a Kohen only, mixed in, the flavor of that mixed in with his own meat. So how is that permitted, right? So we're going to, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to eventually learn from here, but it's going to take a little while still, the laws of nullification. So now, in the amount of nullification. So now, okay, this machloket doesn't really seem yet connected to the 60 and the 100, so I know that we're going to get there. First, we're going to have two different interpretations of what the machloket is. According to the first interpretation, everybody agrees that even though Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai is the only one who says b'shela means it was cooked with the ram, everybody agrees you cooked the zroa with the ram, which means that everyone agrees there's laws of nullification here. Okay, well, that's what we're going to see soon. So what's the person who says ein b'shela ela shlema, what we mean is, well, he obviously means it was cooked with the ram because it says it's cooked. So cooked must be cooked with the ram, and the simple reading is still true. But he adds an additional drasha that it means it has to be cooked whole. Okay, so now we're going to see. Mar savar mechatechla v'hadar mevashala. He says, first you cut the arm off, the foreleg, then you cook it together with the meat, okay? But why does it say whole? It has to be whole, meaning don't slice it up into pieces after you've done that, okay? Now, if it's attached, which is going to be the next opinion, you don't need to say it's whole, it's obviously whole, it's attached. So, the second opinion, which doesn't mention this idea of whole, Mar savar Rav Shimon ben Yochai, mevashala v'hadar mechatecha. First you cook it, then you cut it off the body and you separate it. V'ibai dema, second alternative. So just again, the main point to notice is they both think it's cooked together, and then they're both going to get into laws of nullification from here. In the second interpretation, they both don't think it's cooked together. Only Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who says it explicitly, thinks it's cooked together. Everybody thinks first you cut it, separate it from the rest of the animal, then you cook it. But Umar savar b'teira acheret mevashala. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, who says it's cooked with the ram, says you cook it together. But the first opinion, Tanakama, who says it's cooked means complete, says basically you cook it in its own pot. Okay, cooked means complete because, you can't cut it up into pieces. But it's cooked in its own pot. And then laws of nullification have nothing to do with this at all. Nothing's cooked together. Now, Lalishna Kama, okay, now we're going to get back to our machloket, the 60 and the 100. Lalishna Kama liba de divrei hakol, this I already told you, but according to the first reading, everybody thinks it's cooked together. Lalishna Batra liba de Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. According to the second reading, the machloket's going to be only according to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, when he says laws of nullification kick in. Now here comes the machloket. Manda amar b'shishim savar basar va'atzamot bahade basar va'atzamot misha'arina v'have le b'shishim. The one who says 60 says like this. How do we assess? In other words, assuming we cooked it together, how do we assess the amount? How much? Why is this nullified? Why is this okay? Because you take the body, all the flesh, all the meat, including the bones. If you take the whole body and you compare what percentage of the body is the leg with the bone to the whole body with the bone, it's 1/60th. So that's if you include the bones in the calculation, which you would do according to this opinion because bones can soften and you can eat the marrow from the bones, so they view the bones as part of it. And that they absorb the flavor, right? And that they impart flavor. Manda amar b'mea saval basar bahade basal b'sha'arina v'havele b'mea. We're only talking about the part you really eat. You don't count the bones. So you're talking meat against meat. Now, there's much less meat per square inch or whatever you want to say in the leg. Okay, there's much less meat to bone ratio. The meat to bone ratio is much less in the leg, specific, in the front leg. I'm talking, by the way, about the front right leg. I didn't mention that, but not that it matters for our purposes. So the front right leg has less meat in comparison to the meat of the rest of the animal. So because it's a lot of bone. So that's going to be estimated as 100. So there's this machloket within whoever says it gets cooked together, what allows laws of nullification, either that it's 60 or that it's 100. And from here, we build a paradigm for everywhere. And that's where we get to those two opinions. Now, the Gemara asks, Mi'alfina mina, but how can you learn from this Rav Shela? You forgot this important braita, V'hatanya, zeu heter b'michal isur. This is a case where something is permitted when it's generally forbidden. We don't usually allow this. So how can we possibly build a paradigm from here, right? What is zehu l'mi'ut temai? Why is it say this is a case of heter b'michal isur, but not anywhere else? So what's the not anywhere else? If not, lav l'mi'ut kol isurin sheb'torah. Isn't that coming to exclude all other prohibitions and saying here 60 or 100 is permitted, but not anywhere else? You need a higher ratio of heter to isur, of permitted to non-permitted. So Amar Abai says, no, don't worry about that braita. We're going to have two answers to this braita. One is Abai, one is going to be Rav at the very end of the daf. Abai says, Lo nisracha ela Rabbi Yehuda. Now that braita that said this is a case of heter we're going to permit when we don't permit it in other cases is talking only according to Rabbi Yehuda, who has this unique opinion, if you remember, Da'amal min bimino lo batil. An item in similar item. Now here we have meat from the foreleg compared to meat in the rest of the body. That's meat and meat's the same taste. It's not just nullified at all. Kamash malan dahacha batil. And then it's teaching you, here it is. But in other cases, Rabbi Yehuda thinks it's not. Now, Tanakama thinks, right, the one who disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda says, min b'mino is batal. That's what we had, right, in Amar Rabbanan b'shishim and Amar Rabbanan b'e, right? Shishim is in the case of min b'mino, when you don't have a way to taste, so we use, right, shishim, where we had the batzal and kaflot, okay? We normally do hold min b'mino as batal, but Rabbi Yehuda thinks it's not, and the zeu, this unique case, according to Rabbi Yehuda, where Rabbi Yehuda will say, oh, here we have a case where min b'mino is batal, but it's not anywhere else. To which the Gemara says, v'ligmar mine. Why didn't Rabbi Yehuda just learn it from here? If you see the Torah allows bitul of min b'mino, why did Rabbi Yehuda think min b'mino isn't batal? And that's because of a different pasuk. And we always go back to here and we have Rabbi Yehuda. Gale Rachmana, the Torah told us that it's not batal from the pasuk about the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur. V'lakach midam ha'paru midam ha'seir. He takes the blood from the bull and the blood from the goat, and he mixes them together, and it's still called the blood of, right? First it was mixed, then it says, and you take the blood of the goat and the blood of the bull. Now the blood of the goat is way more than the blood of the bull. Sorry, the blood of the bull is way more than the blood of the goat, and it shouldn't be called both at that point. It should just be the blood of the bull because it overpowers the blood of the goat. So what do you see, right? Travayu bahade adadininu. They're both together, and yet lo batle, and one isn't mavatel the other. So from there he learns, and that's why he doesn't learn it from the Zorah B'Shelah, that it is batel. He says that's the exception to the rule, but he learns it from the blood of the par and the blood of the seir. To which the Gemara asks the obvious question: why are you learning from there? Why don't you learn from here? In other words, it seems arbitrary. You could learn the opposite from the Zorah B'Shelah. So they say chidush shu mechidush lo gamrina. The Zorah B'Shelah is a complete unique halacha. Why is it a complete unique halacha? Because generally, and this is a very important principle in laws of bitul, I told you, they're getting to all the basics here, which is, if I'm cooking and you come by and you spill your coffee into my Chullin pot, then we can say, depending on how much coffee spilled in, right, your coffee with milk, obviously, and cow's milk. So the milk spills in, and basically we assess. But if you come in and decide to pour your coffee into my Chullin pot, okay, we can't just say, oh, well, let's just experiment. Let's see what it will taste like. And if we don't taste it, great, we'll eat it. Can't do that. It's called ein bevatel isur lechatchila. You can't come from the get-go and say, I'm going to pour this in and have it be nullified. Now, in the Zorah B'Shelah, you can. And that's why we're not going to learn from it, because it's a unique case where we're allowed to do something that we're not normally allowed to do, which is take something that is only allowed for the Kohen, mix it with, right, cook it, something that's allowed to everyone else. The flavor is going to go in from the Kohen's piece, and yet we're not going to forbid it. So that's completely unique, and that's why we're not going to learn from there. To which the Gemara says, well, okay, once you got to there, we're not going to learn from Yuri Hachi, Lemeh v'shishim nami lo ligmar. So how are we able to learn it's batal b'shishim, it's batal b'meh from here? If this is a completely unique halacha, then how can we learn from this? Which is, we're using this as a paradigm example, not for min b'mino, but yes for how much things could be nullified, what the percentage is. To which they say, Atu ana lekula gamrinan, lechumra gamrinan, umidoraita beruba batil. We're going to say it like this. We're not saying this lekula. When we want to say, okay, in other words, right now we're going lechumra. Normally we would say, laws of nullification by Torah law is rov. We're going to now allow shishim or mea to basically say, no, we have to be more strict. You can't just nullify it in a majority. You need to make sure that there's 60 against it, not 50%, 50%, right? As long as the heter is the majority, you're good. Okay, that's way different than 60 or mea. The shishim and mea is a chumrah. That will allow. We're just not going to allow a kula. The kula of saying min b'mino isn't canceled, that's a kula. That's going to say, right, Rabbi Yehuda says min b'mino doesn't ever get nullified. And then what, we're going to use Zorah B'Shelah to be lenient there? No way, no how. But we can use it to be machmir. And with that, we answered all the questions against Abaya's theory that this brighta that said, this is heter b'michal isur, that we tried to say, doesn't this mean that we can't learn from this to anywhere else? No, you can learn from it to shishim and mea and all other isurim. You just can't learn from it to say that min b'mino is batel. Now, Rava gives a different answer. And with this, we'll finish for today. Rava Amar, when we go back to that brighta, when we said, what are they trying to say? What's the unique exception? Lo nitzracha ela litam ki ikar. Now, what's going to happen here? What's tam ki ikar? If I have flavor in something, but the actual item is no longer there, like the Zorah B'Shelah, we cook it together with the meat, we take out the Zorah, we give it to the Kohen, what's left with the meat? Just taste, not anything in actuality. Now, the fact that tam is like ikar, it's as if this meat has isser in it, okay? Now, this case, we don't say tam ki ikar prohibits the meat. But in other areas of kodshim, we do. That's what we're going to say here. De bekodshim asir. Anything else in the temple, tam, flavor of something cooked in, is a major problem. Just not here. Okay? Now, this is actually complicated because tam ki ikar is a problem in Chullin also, non-sacrificial items. So how do we resolve that? Either we say that Rava thinks it's not, or doesn't think it's by Torah law. In other words, we can say that Rava thinks that by Torah law, tam ki ikar is only a problem in sacrificial items, not in outside the temple items. Now, in the end, the rabbis forbade it also, but it's only rabbinic. Okay, that's a way to resolve Rava. So in any case, what are they trying to say here? That kamash malan dahachashare. In other words, tam ki ikar is an issue for prohibition by Torah law in kodshim, in any sacrificial items, but not in the Zorah B'Shelah. That's what it's trying to say. This is a case where tam ki ikar is going to be permitted, even though it's forbidden everywhere else. Now, even though it's permitted, right, it's only permitted, well, then it's a little tricky, because if it's permitted, then it's permitted entirely. Why do we have shishim and mea? So that's a bit of a question. So you have to say, we're not, right, the concept that tam ki ikar is permitted here in Torah b'shelah is the concept, but we're also, and that's unique as to other kodshim, but we're also going to be able to somehow learn from here shishim and mea. Just a little bit of a question. I'm going to leave you with sort of something that is not the strongest answer here, because if we're saying we can't learn from it, then we can't learn from it. How do we somehow manage to learn shishim, but the tam ki ikar is actually permitted? So I'm going to leave that question aside right now, and we're going to review the daf. So we started with the Beitzai Froach, and then this question on it from the Tosefta, but we read the Tosefta in two different ways, which one way really could resolve this issue, that it's really not talking about non-kosher, it's talking about Beitzai Froach, and one line in the Tosefta is explaining the other. Then we got to the fat in the meat, and how we don't include the walls of the pot or the basket, because the walls absorb both prohibited items and permitted items, so it doesn't make sense to use it in the calculation. Then we had the question about if it's chatzi shir only, do we need less to nullify it? Which in the end, Rav Ashi said no. Perhaps the sugya later seemed to indicate maybe yes, there's some flexibility, but it wasn't clear because it depends how you read it. Then we had the case of the eggs need more. They need 61 because of the differential in the egg sizes. And then we got to those three cases, which was one of the cases I just mentioned a second ago about Rabbi Yudah Nasi, what he permitted, right? He didn't permit 45, he didn't permit 43, right? Or he didn't permit 47 and 45. The question is, what did he permit? Did he go all the way up to shishim, or was it more a little bit flexible? And then we had this other rabbi said 30, and clearly he said, what? This doesn't even have 30, but he obviously meant 60. He was just exaggerating. Like, you have nothing here to work with. Okay, then we moved on to these two statements of Bar Kapara that were quoted saying opposite things. Is it 60? Is it 100? And from there we got to this big machloket, 60, 100, both based on drashot on the Torah b'shelah. And then we questioned, but what about the fact that it says this is a case that's permitted and not in any other cases? And we basically said it's not talking about the shishim and the mea. It's either talking about min b'mino only according to Rabbi Yehuda. That's an exception to the rule here that min b'mino is nullified. Or it's saying about tam ki ikar in kodshim, when it's normally not nullified, and here it will be. Okay, and with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.